The solitude of the Wyoming high country was a balm Owen Harding applied to wounds he could not name. It was 1874, and the war was nearly a decade gone, but its ghost still walked with him in the thin, cold air. His cabin, a squat structure of hewn logs, stood a stone's throw from the Wind River, its back pressed against a stand of unyielding pines. He had built it himself, a fortress against memory, against the world of men that had failed him. He was a tall man, made lean by hard work. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was a map of past hardships, with lines etched around eyes the color of a stormy sky. His hands were calloused and capable, as comfortable with an axe as they had once been with a rifle. He worked as a ranch hand for a cattleman whose spread was a half-day's ride away, taking his pay in supplies and the right to be left alone. Town was a place he avoided. Lander was a raw settlement filled with noise and judgment. He saw in their faces the same blind certainty that had sent boys, his own brother among them, into the meat grinder of war. The thunder of cannon still echoed in his quietest moments, so he kept to his cabin, to the company of the river and the unsparing mountains. That spring had been a bitter one. A late snow in May had blanketed the high peaks, and now, under the relentless sun of early June, the melt came fast and furious. The Wind River, usually a clear ribbon of blue, had transformed into a churning brown beast, its roar a constant, menacing presence. He was checking his horse's shoes near the corral when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the wilderness. It was human. A thin, desperate shriek, swallowed almost immediately by the river's growl, followed by another just like it. Owen froze, his head cocked. He thought he had imagined it, another phantom from a past filled with cries. Then they came again, fainter this time, but unmistakable. His body moved before his mind had fully consented. He dropped the file and ran toward the riverbank, scanning the torrent. And then he saw them, a flash of dark fabric and pale skin, not one figure but two, tangled together in the branches of a fallen cottonwood that was being battered by the main force of the water. They were caught, two fragile anchors in a world of violent motion. He did not hesitate. He kicked off his heavy boots, stripped off his gun belt, and plunged into the icy water. The shock of the cold was a physical blow. The current was a living thing, a powerful muscle that grabbed at his legs. He fought it, his arms churning, his eyes locked on the women. As he got closer, he could see they were identical. Two young Chinese women, their dark hair plastered to their pale faces. One had her arm hooked desperately around a thick branch while the other clung to her sister, her eyes closed, her face slack with near unconsciousness. He reached the cottonwood, gasping for air. "Hold on," he yelled. He grabbed a sturdy limb, anchoring himself, and reached for them. He saw that one sister's leg was wedged between two branches below the waterline. He took a deep breath, submerged himself, and worked blindly with his hands. His lungs burned. Finally, with a great heave, he freed her limb. She was limp now, a dead weight. Using the last of his strength, he pulled them both away from the snag and began the brutal fight back to shore. He half dragged, half carried them out of the water and collapsed on the muddy bank, his chest heaving. He rolled onto his side and pressed his fingers to their necks. He felt pulses, faint and thready, but there. One of them coughed, a racking sound, and a stream of river water trickled from her mouth. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing dark, almond-shaped eyes wide with a primal fear. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough. "You're safe," the other sister stirred, her eyes opening as well. They clung to each other, trembling violently, their simple cotton dresses in tatters. Where are we?" one of them whispered, her teeth chattering. "My land." "Near the Wind River," he said, rising to his feet. "You need to get warm." "My cabin is close." He reached a hand down to help them. They flinched away from his touch, scrambling backward in the mud like a pair of startled deer. "No," one said, her voice shaking but firm. "Do not take us to town, please." Her plea was so filled with dread it stopped him cold. "I'm not taking you to town," he said gruffly. "But you'll die of cold out here. The cabin is your only choice." They watched him for a long moment, their dark eyes searching his face, weighing one danger against another. Finally, with a barely perceptible nod, they relented. They tried to stand, but their legs gave way. Without a word, Owen scooped one of them into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a bird-boned fragility that felt alien. She went stiff at his touch but did not fight him. He carried her to the cabin, then returned for her sister, a mirror image of the first rescue. He pushed the cabin door open and carried the second woman inside. The small one-room space was spare and orderly. A stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough-sawn table, and 2 chairs. It was the scent of the place, wood smoke, coffee, and solitude, that seemed to unnerve them most. They were an intrusion, and they all knew it. He set the second sister down in the chair closest to the hearth. "Get those wet things off," he ordered, his back already turned as he added more wood to the fire. It was a command born of practicality. He did not look at them, giving them what little privacy the small room allowed. The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the sound of their chattering teeth. He felt a flash of irritation. He had not asked for this, for 2 half-drowned women with fear in their eyes to disrupt the quiet rhythm of his life. Yet, as he listened to the soft rustle of wet fabric being peeled from skin, a different feeling stirred in him, something akin to curiosity. Who were they, and what were they running from that was worse than a flooded river? He finally allowed himself to look at them. They were huddled together in his spare blanket, their wet clothes draped over the other chair. Their dark hair was a tangled mess, and bruises were already purpling on their skin. "My name is Owen Harding," he said, breaking the silence. One of them looked up, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time without immediate fear. "I am she whispered, her voice soft. Her sister added, "I am Leanne." They sat that way for a long time, sipping the hot, bitter coffee he gave them. He watched them and saw the way they flinched when a log popped in the fire. They were wound tight with secrets. As dusk settled, an awkward tension fell between them. There was only one cot. "You take the bed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll sleep by the fire," they nodded, their eyes downcast. He laid out his bedroll on the rough plank floor, keeping his back to them. He was acutely aware of their every movement, the soft rustle as they moved to the cot together. He stared into the dying embers, willing sleep to come, but his mind was agitated by their presence. The cabin felt smaller, the air charged with a strange intimacy. He heard one of them move behind him, the soft pad of her bare feet on the floor. Her voice came out of the darkness, a trembling whisper. "Mr. Harding." He did not move, did not turn. "What is it?" There was a long pause. He could hear the unsteady rhythm of their breathing. "Sir," the voice came again, this time Leanne's, "do you want to look at us?" The question hit him like a stray bullet. He remained frozen, his back to them, every muscle tense. Then Mai's voice, even quieter, joined her sister's. "Will you stay if we undress?" In those words, he heard the echo of 100 transactions he could only imagine. He heard the shame, the resignation, the awful, hollow bartering of women with nothing left to sell but themselves. They were offering him a payment for their rescue, for the food, for the shelter. A hot, unfamiliar shame washed over him, mingled with a surge of anger, at them, at the men who had driven them to this, at a world that could break people down to such a point. He turned his head just enough to see their silhouette in the firelight. They stood together, clutching the blanket, a single fragile shape in the vast darkness. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his body fully away from them, presenting them with nothing but his rigid back. He stared hard into the glowing coals, his jaw clenched. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "No one is going to bother you here." He did not hear them move for a long time. When they finally did, it was the quiet sound of the cot ropes creaking under their weight, followed by a soft, choked sob that they tried and failed to stifle in the darkness. Owen Harding lay on the hard floor, listening to the sound of their weeping and the unabated roar of the river, feeling the first cracks spread across the frozen walls he had built around his heart. The night's raw confession hung in the air between them long after the fire had died. The swollen river made travel impossible, trapping them in a world no bigger than Owen's small plot of land. The sisters, it turned out, were not women who could abide idleness. They fell into a strange, unspoken rhythm with him. They cooked and cleaned with a quiet efficiency, their hands always busy. They spoke to each other in low, rapid Chinese, a language that was as foreign and mysterious to him as their past. Little by little, in fragmented English, their story emerged. Their father had come from across the ocean to work on the railroad, a man chasing a dream of gold and a better life. He had died in a rockslide a month ago, leaving them orphaned and in debt to the cruel camp foreman, a man named Fletcher. Fletcher had claimed that their father's debt now belonged to him, along with all his meager possessions, including his daughters. They were property to be collected. They had packed what little they owned and fled in the dead of night, only to be caught by the raging river. Owen listened, his face a granite mask. He knew the kind of men who ran labor camps. He understood the casual cruelty, the utter lack of law or mercy. As they spoke of their fear, he found himself speaking of his own. He told them of the war, of his brother Samuel, who had died of dysentery in a camp in Virginia without ever seeing a real battle. He told them how he'd come back to find his home and future gone, how he'd come west to lose himself. Their confessions hung between them, a bridge of shared ruin. For the first time, Mai and Lian looked at him not as a savior or a threat, but as a man who understood the language of grief. Their companionship was a thing of quiet spaces. A language grew between them in the way he left a bucket of fresh water for them by the door, and the way they left a hot cup of coffee for him on the hearth. For the first time since the war, Owen felt the sharp edges of his solitude begin to soften. Their presence was a low, steady warmth against the persistent chill of his memories. But with this growing comfort came a tension. One hot afternoon, he came back to the cabin and saw them down at the creek, washing their long, black hair. The sunlight filtered through the cottonwoods, dappling their skin. It was a simple, innocent act, but watching them, Owen felt a powerful, visceral jolt of desire. It was so sharp he turned away abruptly, his heart hammering, ashamed of the thoughts that had risen so easily. They were survivors he had sworn to protect. They were not for him to want. The outside world intruded on the fourth day. Owen saw a rider coming from a long way off. A flicker of panic crossed the sisters' faces. "Who is that?" Mai asked. "Just a hand from the ranch," Owen said. "He won't bother you," but as the rider drew closer, Owen's gut tightened. It wasn't one of the ranch hands. It was a stout, hard-faced man he didn't recognize, followed by two others. Fletcher. The name was a cold stone in his stomach. The sisters saw him too, and all the color drained from their faces. They scrambled back into the cabin like mice darting from a hawk. Fletcher and his men reined in their horses a few yards from the cabin, their expressions a mixture of arrogance and menace. "Well, well," Fletcher called out, his eyes sweeping over the small homestead. "Looks like my property has wandered off." He dismounted, his movement slow and deliberate. "I've come for what's mine, Harding. The girls and the debt they owe me." "They don't owe you anything," Owen said, his voice dangerously calm. He stood on the porch, a solid, immovable wall. His gun was not drawn, but his hand hovered near its hilt. "Stay out of this, Yankee," one of Fletcher's men growled. "This is our business." "They are my business now," Fletcher spat, and lunged for the cabin door. Owen moved with the speed of a striking snake. He shoved Fletcher back with one hand and drew his pistol with the other. But he had underestimated them. The second hired man was already moving, not with a gun, but with a knife. As Owen turned, the man rushed him, the blade a silver arc. Owen parried the first thrust, the steel scraping against his gun barrel. He brought the heavy pistol down in a brutal arc, catching the man on the side of the head. The man staggered, but he was tough. He came back, jabbing low. Owen felt a sudden white-hot fire in his left side. He grunted as the blade sank into his ribs. He stumbled back, a dark, wet stain already spreading across his shirt. Mai and Lian screamed from inside the cabin. The world seemed to slow down. Lian saw Owen stagger, his face contorting in pain. She saw Fletcher smile, a cruel, triumphant smirk. In that moment, something inside her snapped. The fear, the grief, the years of helplessness, they burned away, leaving behind a core of pure rage. The heavy iron skillet she'd been cleaning sat on the hearth. Without thinking, she grabbed it. As the man who had stabbed Owen turned toward the door, Leanne burst out, swinging the skillet with all her might. The heavy cast iron connected with the man's head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. Everything froze. Fletcher and his remaining man stared, stunned, at the small woman holding the skillet, her chest heaving. In that frozen moment, Owen, despite the searing pain in his side, pushed himself off the wall. He fired his pistol, not at Fletcher, but at the ground near his feet. The shot kicked up a spray of dirt that made Fletcher yelp and jump back. "Get out of here," Owen growled, his voice strained but full of menace. "And if you ever come back, I'll bury you on this land." Fletcher looked from Owen's smoking gun to the unconscious man on the ground, and then to the two women standing together on the porch, one with a skillet, the other with eyes blazing with defiance. The odds had changed. He cursed, grabbed the reins of his man's horse, and rode away, leaving his wounded companion in the dust. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and healing. The doctor from Lander, summoned by a ranch hand, declared that the knife had missed anything vital but had gone deep. Owen's small cabin became a sickbed. Time was measured by the changing of bandages and the slow return of color to his face. Maya and Leanne never left his side. They were fierce, tireless guardians of his recovery, their roles shifting from rescue to caretakers. In this crucible of vulnerability, the last of their walls crumbled. He was no longer just the strong rescuer, and they were no longer fragile victims. They were a man and two women bound by a shared fight. In the long quiet nights, they lay beside him on the narrow cot, their warm presence a comfort against the pain. It was in these dark hours that his own ghosts came for him. The war, which he had kept locked away, broke free in his fevered dreams. He would cry out in his sleep, his body thrashing. "Samuel," he would shout, his voice thick with an old, unhealed agony. They did not try to wake him. Instead, they would lean close, their voices a lifeline in his sea of memory. "You are not there, Owen," Mai would whisper. "The war is over," Leanne would add, "you are here with us. You are safe." They would describe the room, the pattern of the moonlight, the weight of the quilt, until the tension left his body and he would quiet, his hand finding theirs in the darkness. They were calming the ghosts that had haunted his solitude. His physical strength returned slowly. One afternoon, he took his first few shuffling steps to the window, leaning on them for support. They stood there, looking out at the river, now calm and clear. He looked at the women who had nursed him, who had fought for him,